it. Yeah. So, right. Cool. So, as I said, the second half is completely different to the first half. So kind of try and forget everything I've just told you, because we're going to talk about something completely different. So I've worked in IT pretty much all my life. And I know what you're thinking, that isn't very long at all. But I'm actually older than I look. And in fact, I've been out in IT since data processing. That shows how long ago I was. And over the time I've been involved, the world has changed quite a bit. Because it used to be that you'd turn up to, say, a party or something, and you'd meet somebody and they'd say, well, what do you do? And you'd say, oh, well, I work in computers. And they go, oh, that's nice. Now, if you say you work in computers, they go, oh, you couldn't have a look at my PC because it's doing the shittiest thing. In fact, what I've decided to do is I've taken a leaf out my brother-in-law's book. My brother-in-law is an electrician, but when anybody asks him what he does, he tells them he's a lift engineer, because nobody ever needs a lift engineer, you know? So, yeah, I think it's the way forward. But so what I wanted to do was take you through possibly the main thing I've learned in my time, and that is that if you do one thing on your computer, anything on your computer, you should make sure you back it up. And so that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. What I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start off, I'm going to explain a bit of the jargon I use, so we're all singing off the same hymn sheet. We've got all our ducks in a line and wagons in a circle. And I'm going to talk about why you should back up and what you should back up. And with the why, I'm going to try and scare you as much as possible with just a few of my war stories. With what you should back up, I'm going to try and make you think about what's important to you. And finally, I'm going to do a little bit on how to back up. But that will depend on each of you. It'll just give you an idea of what to think about. So let's think about a few of the words we're going to use. So hardware. You often hear this thrown about, the hardware. What is hardware? Well, it was explained to me that when I started that if you can kick it, it's hardware. So this laptop is hardware, my phone is hardware, my keyboard is hardware, my monitor is hardware. All of this is hardware because you can kick it, yeah. But the thing is with hardware, it might be a clever set of electronic circuits, but it doesn't do anything till it has a set of instructions. And that set of instructions is what we call software, right? So software will be things like Microsoft Windows, Apple OS X, Photoshop, Word. All of those programs are software because they are a set of instructions that make your computer actually useful. So it's quite simple, isn't it? If you can kick it, it's hardware. If you can run it, it's software. But that's too easy. So what we decided was somebody thought to themselves, what would be good is if we could bake software into hardware, and that gives us firmware. So what's firmware? Well, if you think about your camera, when you pick your camera up, when you switch it on, you don't wait for Microsoft Windows to boot up and the disk to spin up, and then it to load everything before you can take a photo, because that just wouldn't be practical. So what you're actually running is some software programs, but they're actually embedded in the chips, and you can update those using doing what they call a firmware upgrade. But generally speaking, they're there all the time and they're in hardware, but it's software baked into hardware. But that's why when your camera gets a firmware upgrade, suddenly it can have a whole new set of facilities, because basically your camera is just a computer. It's just a very powerful computer. So backup, what do we mean by having a backup? This is simply having more than one copy of your data. Yeah. So I've spoken to people who said, oh, I'm fine. I've got all my pictures on an external hard drive. Yeah. What, one external hard drive? Yeah. Well, that's not a backup, that's just one copy of something. So having more than one copy of something is when you've got a backup. And I just used the term there, back up your data. What is data? Yeah, we hear it's used all the time. What does it mean? Well, here you go. Press down the space bar and shout if you think you know. What does that number mean? What is that series of digits? What is it?
Phone number.
It's a phone number. Do you think it's a phone number? It could be a phone number, or it could just as easily be my lottery numbers. Yeah, because it depends on how you interpret it, and how you interpret it is up to the software. Yeah. So this is why, data only actually becomes useful when the software knows how to understand it. So this is why when you open a JPEG file in Notepad, it just looks like a load of junk. Yeah. Or if you lose the first couple of bytes off a big file, it can be completely useless because your computer software doesn't understand how to interpret the data in. So data and information pretty much interchangeable, but that's why we use the term. So typical desktop computer. What are the parts of the hardware that's involved? Well, I'm going to get you with some really technical names here. First of all, we have what we call the telly. And then we have a sort of whizzy typewriter thing. And finally, a mouse. And all of these are pretty much interchangeable. You can put another screen on your computer, don't make any difference. Keyboard, mouse, even if they're all built into one laptop, it's all pretty much the same. They're just sort of dumb plugins. The thing that is where the action is happening is in what we call the big box of electro gubbins. Now this again could be built into the laptop, but it's the important bit. And when we look inside the big box of electro gubbins, we get three things. We'll get four. We get a power supply, but who cares about that? We've got a processor. Now the processor is, for want of a better term, the computer's brain. And it can do stuff. So, you know, it used to be Pentiums or 386s or whatever. The faster the processor's brain, the more the computer's brain, the more it can do. The trouble is, it can't do anything unless it has stuff to do. And it gets the programs or the software and the data it needs to work on from memory. Now, the nice thing about memory is it's really, really fast. Which is good. So what'll happen is your computer, you'll ask it to run Photoshop, and the first thing it'll do is it'll pull all the program out of memory onto your processor, and it's fine. The only trouble with this is memory is what we call volatile. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you switch the computer off, the memory is wiped. This would make computers pretty useless. Yeah. I mean, it explains why when they tell you to reboot your machine, things often improve because you're clearing the memory out. But it would make computers pretty useless if every time you switched them on, you had to type in all the instructions for Photoshop and then all the ones and zeros that made up your picture. Yeah, you'd never get anything done. Yeah, so it's completely useless. So we need something that isn't volatile, and that is your disk drive. And your disk drive is the one place your information is held. So much so that, for instance, at work, if somebody's computer fails and it's not the disk drive, we'll just pull the disk drive out of the machine, give them a new machine, slap the old disk drive in, and they're back running exactly as they were. If the disk drive has failed, it's a bit more of a problem. We've got to completely rebuild the machine from scratch because the only thing that actually stays from one power off to power on is the disk drive and the information on the disk drive, which leads me to why you should back up. Now, spinning disk hard drives, how to explain them? I'm not sure you'll get this, but because you're quite a young audience, but we'll see if we can get this. Do you remember before streaming that music used to come on MP3 files? And before MP3 files, music used to come on CDs. Anybody that old? Okay.
Yeah. Still
and
does.
before CDs, you used to have this stuff called vinyl. I don't know if you remember this, but anyway, if you go back to the days of vinyl, you remember that your record player was basically, you put a needle on and it follow an educated groove all the way around to play your music off, because the information was encoded in the bumps and pits in the groove of the record. Pretty much a spinning disc drive is pretty much the same idea, only the slight difference is instead of a spiral track, it's got concentric tracks, and the heads, instead of dipping into the groove, they fly microscopically just above the top of the surface of the disc and read it via magnetic interaction. Oh, and the other thing is your LPs were played at 33 1/3. These most modern disc drives are running at 3,600 revs per minute. And so what you've got is you've got a spinning device with stuff in there, and it's a sealed device. And with most drives, what you'll find is that they have what they call an MBF. What is an MBF? Well, that's a mean time between failures, the average time the drive will last. So quite often you'll see a mean time MBF of, say, 5 years, 7 years. What does that mean? Well, it means that some drives last 5 years on average, but some drives will only last 1 year and other drives will last 20 years, but you don't know. There's a saying in the industry that there are only two types of hard drives, ones that have failed and ones that are going to fail. And once you realize that your data, the bit that you keep, that you keep from time to time, from boot to boot, is on something that definitely will fail, we just don't know when, then it becomes a good reason to have a backup. People often ask at this point about SSDs or solid state drives, SSDs or solid state drives. Yeah, they've got less chance of breaking than a spinning disc, because a spinning disc, you imagine it's spinning around at 3,600 miles. I've got ones over here that have been running for 15 years. Yeah, and they're still working perfectly fine. You can't imagine a car working for 15 years without ever needing a service, but these things do. I mean, they're incredibly reliable for what they are, but they're still mechanical, so they're more likely to break down than a solid state drive. But even then, a solid state drive can break. But there's other ways we can lose your data as well, and we'll go on to them. But let's talk about a disk drive. So I did this analysis of a while back on this laptop in front, and I looked at the hard drive, and it costs 70 quid. Yeah, okay, fair enough, 70 quid for a drive. Let's have a look what we're storing on there. Well, I've got 31,000 photos on there, and if each of those cost me 10p, there's £3,000 worth of photos. Your money may vary on that, but I mean, 10p a shot isn't unlikely when you work out, you know, petrol, cameras, equipment, software, all the money you've spent on taking those pictures can easily go to 10p a picture. And if you do commercial work, a single picture could be worth £3,000 to you. I mean, I've got single pictures that are worth a lot more than that. Then I've got 3,000 emails. And again, let's price those at 10p. Now, you may say your emails are not worth anything. Well, why are you keeping them then? You might be keeping them because, you know, even if just being able to find that old email from 3 years ago saves you 20 minutes thinking time, 20 minutes of work, it's worth 10p to anybody. So, you know, let's say they're worth 10p, £300. And again, with documents, they may or may not be worth as much as that, but even if it's like a flyer for the church fete and you pull up last year's flyer and you just change the dates and tweak it a bit, that saved you at least 10p's worth of time, isn't it? So, you know, that's worth another 100 quid. And then on there, I've got 7,500 songs, which if I had to buy them all from scratch would cost me easily that. And then I got £4,500 worth of software on it. Some of that I've even paid for. So now most of it comes from work, to be fair. But on that particular machine, I had £11,000 worth of stuff. This calculation's a little old. If I did it again today, I'd probably rework it, and it would probably be up in the 20,000s now, I reckon. So that £70 hard drive that you are putting all your faith in can have thousands of pounds worth of stuff on it. Yeah? And when you start thinking about what would happen if I lose this, you know, it's actually worth money, real money. I'm of the opinion they shouldn't sell hard drives in singles. They should sell them in pairs, so you've always got a backup. So you can easily lose stuff by your hard drive failing. Other ways to lose your data, user error. There's a couple of names for this in the industry. One is that there's a loose nut on the keyboard. Or quite often you'll see on help desk, you'll see calls closed with PBCAK. There is a problem between the chair and the keyboard. People make mistakes. People make mistakes all the time. I used to work a long time ago for a major household name bank, and I left quite a while ago, but I still keep in touch with the guys who work there. Anyway, one day they were doing an upgrade of a bit of software. It's been upgraded hundreds of times over the years. And guy was following the instructions. Instead of following the instructions or reading them completely, left one checkbox unchecked. This meant that instead of just upgrading, it completely reinstalled, wiping all the existing config, meaning that all their overnight batch jobs stopped running, meaning that the entire bank was frozen for up to 5 days. It was over the news and everything. That simple mistake led to that bank losing an awful lot of money. You know, professional computer people can make mistakes just the same as everybody else. But similarly, another example of mistakes is one for me. I was working on my Lightroom catalogue. I selected a few pictures and I thought to myself, let's change them to black and white. And the laptop ground to a halt. I thought, well, that's a bit weird. And nothing would respond. So in the end, I rebooted my machine. I went back into Lightroom. And at that point, I realized that instead of changing the half a dozen pictures I thought I was changing all 31,000 pictures in the catalogue to black and white. Now, me being me, I instantly thought, right, okay, well, I know Lightroom runs on a MySQL database. I can roll back the previous transaction. It's going to take me 2 or 3 days to write the code because I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure I can do it. And then eventually I thought, well, what are you doing? Hang on a sec. Last night you had a backup. You know, just restore last night's backup, put that on there and carry on as you were. And so having a backup can convert a crisis into just an inconvenience. You know, if it's there, it can just be, you know, just another half hour restoring the backup and we carried on. But people make mistakes. Software. All computer software has bugs because it is very, very complex, very hard to write well, and you know, every possible piece of software will have errors in it because somebody's clicked somewhere they didn't think they should, or just clashes with something else. I mean, and the thing that should really worry you about software is that people like me wrote it. I'm an absolute cowboy. And so you know, to be fair, software has got kind of better over the years. We used to say, start at the beginning of the year, right, we're going to, by the end of the year, we will have delivered this. And what we're going to do is going to spend the first 6 months developing it, 6 months testing, and ship it out to the users. What actually happened was we slipped on our timescale. So we spent the first 11.5 months developing, spent about a week testing, shipped it to the users and let them find all the bugs. These days, we do it differently now. What we do is we tend to write our tests first, and then if we write the code to fit the tests, and we write smaller bits of code. That's why you'll notice that quite often you're getting constant updates, because it's easier to understand little changes rather than massive great changes. So software has got a bit more reliable, but it's still nothing. And there's all sorts of bugs that can easily appear in a bit of software, just gently and messing up your pictures or your data, whether you like it or not. Then we get on to the unholy trinity of virus, malware, and hackers. So the image is of a hacker is of a 14-year-old lad who can't get a date, sitting in his room trying to hack into your computer. That is no longer true. What is actually trying? Organised crime wants to get hold of your machine. Yeah. Why does it want to get hold of your machine? Well, okay, obviously, if they could get into your computerized banking, that would help. But more likely, computer security is done through factoring prime numbers. Yeah, I know, I don't understand it either. But what that means is that in order to crack your password, the only way I could do it is brute force attack, which would mean I would need to take a standard computer, run it for 500 years, and eventually it would crack your password. The idea is that within those 500 years, you've changed your password. But somebody one day thought, hang on a sec, if one computer can do it in 500 years, what happens if I've got 500 computers? I can do it in a year. If I've got 5,000, we're down to a month. If I've got 50,000, we're down to a day. If we got 5 million computers all working on the same problem, suddenly these difficult to crack things become pretty quick and pretty easy to crack. And so that's why they want to install software on your machine and what they call zombie your machine, which means it works in the background for them rather than for you. So you might not be bothered about somebody using your computer to break into banks. That's fine. Or break into big companies. That's fine. One thing you got to think about is you've got software running on your machine that you don't want running on, which is probably going to make it go slower and make it break. But another thought for you, if you're not worried about them using it to break into big companies, here's a thought. If I run a child pornography ring, you know where I wouldn't store my pictures? It'd be on my computer. But I'd certainly store them on your computers. That would be a much better place to store it, wouldn't it? So good security software is vital. These days with Windows and Mac, you probably don't need separate security security software if you just don't click on attachments and things like that. If you're reasonably well behaved, then the updates come through. But you should always keep your computer up to date. As soon as an update comes through and it says we want to reboot your machine, let it. Yeah. I know it's annoying. I know it only does it just 2 minutes before you're about to do a presentation to a very nice camera club. But if you keep your software up to date, you've got much more chance of being protected, because it's an arms race. The bad guys find a hole, the software companies patch it. They find a hole, they patch it. They're just constantly fighting like that. So you need to keep your computer always up to date.
Chris,
yes?
I'm going to interject here. Being the website person for the company, website and email person, company, club, there are quite a good proportion of the membership who are of the mind that it's scarier to update, that they're still in that sort of mindset. So anything you can...
Well, hopefully what I've just said will sink in. Generally speaking, you might get the inconvenience of your computer not working, but there's something might break. But these days they tend to give you security patches different to functionality patches, and you really want to accept all the security patches if you can. Hopefully, the final 3 ways you can lose your data are theft, flood, and fire. So basically, if some drugged up oik knocks open your front door and is looking for things to steal, shiny laptops and shiny disk drives are great, because you can just run out with them. They're light, and you can get a few quid down the pub for them, no problem at all. A few years back now, but there was an appeal went out on BBC, ITV London, and it was a couple, a family, it was a couple. They were appealing that their house had been broken into, and somebody had stolen all their laptops and all their hard drives and all their computers, and which would be heartbreaking enough, which would be annoying enough. Only the reason they were appealing was because their daughter had died at the age of 2, and all the pictures they had of her, every single one of them was on those hard drives, and they had no printed out pictures of her at all, and they lost the lot. And suddenly those hard drives become worth a lot more than the 11,000 I said. They're almost priceless. So there's theft, there's flood. You might think, oh, I live near a river, or I don't live near a river. Yeah, that's one way you can get flood. Another way, so twice in my career, I have come into the office on a Monday morning to discover a pipe has burst over the top of my computer and soaked all my desk and everything else. It's another easy way to get flooded. And of course, fire. You know, if the house catches light, you just want to grab your family and run out. You don't want to have to run back in to grab your disk drive of your pictures. You know, that seems like a horrible thing to do. So hopefully that's covered some of the whys you should back up. I'll give you one more. Oh, yeah, one more story. So one evening, I got a phone call from a friend of mine, and he said to me, he said, "Chris, could you come over and sort out our email? And we can't get our email." I said, "Yeah, right, I'll pop over the weekend." He said, "No." He said, "Can you come tonight, now?" I said, "Why? What's the matter?" Well, it turns out that they were going on holiday the following morning, and all their bookings and tickets and everything had been sent to them via email, and they couldn't get into their email. Yeah. And suddenly each of those emails was worth a lot more than 10p to them. You know, so, I mean, it was actually a pretty easy fix, so it was okay. But, you know, these things have value. We do stuff on computers for a reason. You've got to start valuing this stuff. So let's look at what you should back up. Well, if you've bought software, you need to make sure you've got the serial numbers for the versions you want to download. Password's not so important these days. The one password I would always recommend you keep hold of somewhere is the one for connecting to your internet service provider. Because if you have to rebuild your machine, the first thing you're going to pretty need to do is connect to the internet. And you don't want all that time of trying to get through to somebody in Mumbai who doesn't understand your accent and asks you lots of security questions you can't remember what you gave the answers to. So your connection to your ISP is really a handy one to back up. And then we can back up what's important. Well, what's important? Well, things like emails. I've just said why emails are important. Again, documents, stuff you've downloaded, stuff, you know, you've bought, paid money for videos, music, stuff like that. You might be able to download it from the company you bought it from. You might not. And videos, all of that handy. And of course, being a camera club, photos. Now, one of the discussions that I have with online with people is that they will say, I only shoot raw for what's important. I only back up what's important. So my argument is it's really hard to know what is important. So a few years back now, a friend of mine, they asked me, could I photograph their wedding? Now, you know what it's like. You're a landscape photographer. Yeah, of course I can photograph your wedding. If you'd like to stand and look like a mountain, that'd be great. Why don't you lie down and pretend to be a lake? That'd be good. But, you know, I said I'd do it anyway. So I did the wedding, took loads of photos. I put them together in a book for them, got the book printed, presented them with the book. And as far as I'm concerned, that was the job done. Yeah. They were happy, I was happy, and I had a disk drive with, you know, 1,800 pictures from the wedding, none of which meant anything to me. Now, at that point, I could have deleted them. Yeah, it wouldn't have mattered if I'd have deleted them because they didn't mean anything to me. Well, this lady in the middle here, Jackie, she was at the wedding, and 2 years after that wedding, she died of brain cancer. And the family came to me and said, have you got any nice pictures of Jackie? Right? Because we were so worried about her illness, we never took any pictures. Top lesson, take pictures of people you love. So I went through the wedding, and it wasn't Jackie's wedding. So I, you know, there weren't that many photos of her, but I found this one with her and her two boys. And because it was taken in RAW, I had a lot of information to deal with, and I shoved it into Photoshop, and I did a bit of work on it in Photoshop, and then I pushed it through a rip so as I could get the biggest possible print I could do, so every pixel was screaming. And eventually I managed to print out that for them. And I printed it A4, put it in a frame for them, took it round to them. And I tell you what, it's probably one of the most important pictures I've ever taken. Yet at the time, I didn't know it was going to be. Yeah, so it's really hard to know what's important. I mean, I reckon that if you look back on your photos, the ones that your competition photos, you probably won't be that interested in. But shots of maybe a house which show what carpet you had, or family and friends you haven't seen for ages, are going to be much more interesting. At the time, they were probably mistakes or test shots or stuff like that. You know, and so, you know, maybe a shot at the front of the house, and you suddenly realize, oh, that was what it was like without the extension, and all of that. So all of that you will find more interesting. I think it's really hard to know what's important. So I would say back up everything and keep as much as possible. You know, I can talk. I tend to, when I download from the camera, I tend to throw away all the junk, all the, you know, badly shot or badly framed pictures, and just keep the rest before I start processing them, which is great until you decide you're going to do a talk on composition, and then you want to try and find ones that are badly composed, and of course you've thrown them all away. So how do we back up? Well, let's have a look at how many copies we need, the hardware, the software, and how often we should back up. So how many copies we should have. This comes up often as the 3-2-1 rule. That's 3 copies of everything in 2 separate locations. We need 2 separate locations to protect us from fire, flood, and theft, one of which is instantly available. So in my case, we have the data on this laptop, which is the one online and available, instantly available. We have it backing up to another computer over here, which is the second copy. And then that all gets backed up to the cloud, which gives me 3 copies of that. Another way of saying the same thing is the 3 O's rule. That's 1 online, 1 offline, and 1 off-site. What can you use to, I mean, it doesn't matter how many, if you've got more than 3, but 3 is kind of like a minimum, really. I said this laptop gets backed up to that PC, but that PC has 2 copies of everything on it already. So I've already got 3 copies here before it goes up to the cloud. What you use to back up. Now, if you're still using CDs, DVDs, or tape, don't bother. You hardly get anything on a CD or a DVD, so that's not going to be worth using. Tape is ridiculously expensive and not really used these days. So the options are another hard drive, which is not a bad thing. Oh, clicked in the wrong place. Another hard drive, another computer, or the cloud. So so you can do, if you want to do your remote backup, one way you can do it is back up to one drive, take it around to a friend's, swap it for another drive, bring it back here, and keep doing that. It's quite awkward to do. It's quite, you have to be quite disciplined and remind yourself. If you do it, say, around your parents or your family, it gives you a reason to go and visit. But other than that, it's quite awkward. But if you're backing up to the cloud, it's usually quite easy, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So generally, setting up a backup on your machine is pretty easy at its simplest. You buy a hard drive, you plug it in, and then there'll be an option. So on a Mac, it'll ask you if you want to use it for Time Machine. On Windows, I think it's now called file versioning. But it just says, do you want to use it for backup? And you just follow the prompts, and then it's doing it. And that'll sit there backing up to that spare drive whenever you like. Most people end up with something a little bit more sophisticated. Some sort of synchronization software, which will copy from one drive to another. I use a thing called Always Sync, but there are plenty of other products that do the same thing. Or there's even products that completely make a complete image of your computer. So should it fail, you just copy that image back onto a new machine and start again. So talk about the cloud. So first of all, what am I talking about? Well, you can back up to a cloud is somebody else's computer, yeah? Which in this case is another company, a company's computer. And so yes, it's somebody else's computer, but it's somebody else's computer who understands computer security, who has professionals looking after it, has lots of, keeps it up to date, make sure it's not being hacked, all of that stuff, none of which happens with your machine. So it goes up to the cloud. Initially, upload speeds are a problem because it can take quite a while. You're talking maybe 3-4 months to upload its data first time, but once it's up there, keeping it up to date is relatively easy. I use a company called Backblaze. Now they're about, I think it's about $60 for unlimited storage, right? For $60 a year for unlimited storage. And when they say unlimited, they mean unlimited. I have at the moment 10 terabytes in the cloud, just getting pushed up to there. That's a huge amount of data out there. If you started now, it'd probably take about a year and a half to upload it all. But because it's done it over the last 10 years or so, it doesn't really matter. Should my machine fail and I need to get it back, I can either download it, or they will send you, they will courier you a new disk drive with all the stuff on it. But you should not rely on it. Just as using a single hard drive can fail, a backup company can fail. They can go bust. They can have, the data centers can fail. All sorts of things can go wrong. So you don't rely on them. You don't rely on anything. That's when you have 3 copies. Now, if Backblaze go bust tomorrow, I will just start uploading to another offsite backup company. It's not an inconvenience because I've got enough copies here that it's just a backstop backup that I use. I've only ever needed to restore from them once, but that's because I've been lucky. And then how often do you want to back up? A system will fail just before you are going to back it up. That is the law of computing, as I understand it. And so if you leave it for 3 months, and shouldn't really need to worry about backups much. Once you've got it set up and it's an automatic process, you shouldn't really need to care about it. Maybe occasionally check that it's all working. But generally speaking, computers here to make your life easier. Set it up, automate it, get it doing it overnight, whatever. So I'll show you this because I get asked this as what is the easiest way to implement this. And this is probably the easiest way, and that is you have your computer with all the drives in it with all your pictures on it and everything, and with its own internal drives or external drives, doesn't really matter. All of those get backed up onto an external hard drive. So you've got 2 copies here, and then you leave it running so as it backs up to the cloud as well. Like I say, backing up to the cloud sounds incredibly complicated. It's not. It's really quite simple once you've set it up, log it in, download their software, set up an account, and pretty much forget about it, really. That's pretty much it. That's what I kind of want to leave you with as a thought tonight. You are going to lose stuff if you don't have a backup. It's just almost guaranteed. It's easy to delete stuff. It's easy to make mistakes. Things fail. Things go wrong. If you've ever worked on a help desk, I worked on a help desk, and the #1 call we used to get was, in Microsoft Word, yeah, when it says, when you close down and it says, do you want to save your document? Yeah. And if you say no, yeah, can you get it back? No. Because you said you didn't want it. In fact, it's so bad that actually the new versions of Word ignore that and do actually keep a copy in case you've got that. It's easy to make mistakes. People make mistakes all the time. Things go wrong all the time. Everything fails all the time. So make sure you have a backup of your data and you really won't regret it. And that is it. Any questions?
Having gone through a similar problem, I had to reintroduce data back on my PC. Fortunately, I've got a server in the office. I managed to recover most of it, but it's probably little bits that I don't realise that have disappeared, but until one day I'm going to need them. So yes, quite right. What a sobering way to end. We're going to come back and carry that. But it was, very sensible and certainly worthwhile doing. That was Yeah, a bit of an eye opener there.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I try and make my backups. I have a big RAID array sitting in the garage.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I lose out of it, I can reinstate it. But there's still more to be done. Yeah, I think you're right. I should investigate backplays.
Yeah, I mean, I should actually get a commission from them, but it's one of those things. It's just a really good product that works, yeah, if you're remotely technical, it's worth checking out their site as well, because they do things like they can do the storage much cheaper than everybody else, because they make their own storage pods full of disk drives, and they don't, instead of buying industrial grade disk drives, they just use the standard ones that come in PCs, but they use them in such a way that any of them can fail and they can just replace 2 or 3 in a pod.
Yeah,
that really clever technology. So
okay,
which is the RAID stuff that David was talking about, isn't it? I think it stands for random array of inexpensive disks.
Yes, it's redundant array. Yeah. It's much cleverer than RAID. It's because even the storage pods they've got, your stuff is spread across like 6 storage pods, and the whole pod can fail as well, and they can replace that and it will build it up again. It's the same idea as RAID, but on a massive scale. They've got, last heard they had 16 petabytes of data on their data system, which is just ridiculous. Yeah, I don't know how big a petabyte. I don't know how big a petabyte is, by the way.
It's the next level of terabytes.
It's 1,000 terabytes.
Yeah, so it's huge, humongous.